Good morning. Aboard Pride of Baltimore 2 in Baltimore on this Friday. What is today? The 12th of June. We've got Chief Mate Jeff Crosby behind the camera. My name is Jan Miles, captain of the Pride of Baltimore. We here in Baltimore have just had the humidity track break finally. It's actually a pretty nice feeling on board. It's been in the high 90s, or rather, yeah, high 80s, low 90s, and 80% humidity. So now we're down to more like 60% humidity. So we're feeling pretty good right now.
Yeah, it's a pretty pleasant morning. Before we get into the thick of things, what's the crew been up to?
So with the announcement that and the decision that we're going to lay the boat up, tie the boat up for the rest of the year, we've been for a while now covering the boat and getting her protected. So the house frame was finished the other day. This week, you and the crew have been covering with the plastic, acts as a shade. Also skirting the side of the ship because the ship is oriented east and west. So the sun is always coming around the starboard bow, around the starboard stern, and then in the summertime it gets pretty far north and comes in under the port quarter. And we've been experiencing drying out along that side more so than the other side. So we skirt all the way down to the waterline to create shade. And so we're also been working on getting other things out of the ship. So 600 feet of anchor road, it's like this, has been taken out of the ship, but still on board, and it's tied up to the frame of the house. Ventilation down below is the big thing that you're working on with lots of fans and making sure that by the time Tuesday rolls around, the end of the day rolls around on Tuesday the 16th, the seasonal crew will be at their end of their last day. The vessel's totally open down below. Floorboards are all up. All the cabin sole boards, hatches are up, and fans down below pushing air around much more aggressively than we did in 2018 to deal with the possibility of mold. Summertime it gets quite quiet around here, so it doesn't have a lot of wind. Temperature is real high. Humidity can go up and down. Wintertime we don't see that problem because it's a short period of time. Winter tends to be a lower humidity scenario on the average. So we learned in 2018 we have to be very aggressive about ventilation.
Yeah, that's been a pretty fun project of finding unique fans to go in unique areas. So if you joined us last week, we started a conversation about voyage prep. We had talked a lot about weather routing and planning out what route you would take on a voyage. This week we're going to continue that conversation, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the physical nature of getting the ship ready for voyaging and ocean voyaging. So let's start off with the question, what is unique about Pride 2 to help her be able to cross oceans, to do significant ocean voyaging?
Well, under the American flag, U.S. Coast Guard vessels that make really, really long, sustained voyages are not very many. You've got Sea Education Association with their vessels. They do sustained ocean travel with semester at sea stuff. So they're used to what it is that is needed to make that possible. They're dealing with more people on board for the size of vessel than we are. So it's not rocket science, but it's not a common practice. So in the case of the wooden traditional sailboat for long endurance of our size, the second vessel was from the very beginning planned around the idea of making long sustained voyages. Anyone that recalls the first boat, it was to be a stationary display.
Yeah.
So the business of going sailing and going on ever increasing voyages raised the question of, don't we need this and don't we need that just for living aboard? She got refrigeration in 1980.
Oh, wow.
She was sailing in 1977. Now, she hadn't made any Atlantic crossings. So in the case of Pride of Baltimore 2, we started out with knowing we were going to, at least in concept, be doing long distance voyages because of the campaign in 1985 with the old boat was successful in Europe. So we were going to go to Europe. Later on, we didn't know it at the time, but later on we wound up going to Asia. So all the prep that goes to the sustaining of a long-distance voyage went in not only into the design and construction, but also into the business of choosing our equipment. And there's been some changes over time. One of the things that was totally different is water making.
Sure.
In fact, what was interesting was I wished with the designer to have more than he had planned. And he said, it's never going to happen. You're going to go with water making. And so we went without water making, reverse osmosis for the first year, but then we got it on board. And since it's been upgraded. And so the cycle of what's the fuel on board, what's the generation on board, and then with auxiliary power, if you're doing some motor sailing, how do you deal with fuel capacity and range? And so there's a lot of adjustment that the boat went through. With twin screw, we have one engine running under sail occasions, but if we then have to still run the generator for twice a day generation to recool the refrigeration, make replacement water, and charge up the batteries for the period of time in between, then you're running two engines, one of which is not really contributing anything except propulsion, and the other one's not contributing any propulsion. So we've equipped the main engines with equipment that means that if we're motor sailing with one engine or both, we have the ability to replace everything at least one at a time. Because when you do motor sailing, you're in your cross ocean or cross bodies of water or coastal, you're going to run for several hours. Yeah. Whereas the generation cycle is on a plan of maybe 2.5 hours, less than 3, twice a day. So there's so we've spent a lot of time starting in the beginning and over the 33 decades plus adjusting. Refrigeration was increased because one of the things that I learned years ago with long distance voyaging, no refrigeration, is what you can do to have longer life with perishables for food.
Sure.
And in small boats, the question is, how do you avoid contaminating those perishables if you're stowing on deck? Because down below it's a little bit stifling. Mm-hmm. So I wound up creating, after a year of sailing the boat or so, a sort of a cooling refrigeration box. So the idea was to dehumidify but cool. And it's had some...
Not necessarily a refrigerator.
Yeah, right.
But a more... Yeah.
It's gone that way because of technology. We're now running a 24-volt constant on cooling plate system, and so it's now become a refrigerator. But overall, the movement was we're going to have 18 people aboard the boat. What's our endurance? And it starts with the fuel through what technology we have without redundant burning of fuels, with, in the sense that we can't always contribute to our storage capacity when we're running an engine. And so ultimately I calculate that we could go 50 days.
Okay.
Strictly generator. Now, what voyage would cause that to happen? Well, probably not any, considering the mission is going to major population centers.
Right.
Because of the commerce side of it, it's all about handshake and hello and let's do business. So we're not going to really, really remote places.
Disappear for 50 days, sailing somewhere.
But we've done certainly had nonstop travel. The longest ones have been typically the Panama, Hawaii to Asia, Asia to Pacific Northwest. Those are all 5,000-mile legs, and they're running anywhere between 22 to 25 days. And so, we've always had water because of the discipline of no matter when we've started a generator, we're always replacing the water twice a day. That's meant life aboard the boat's been pretty luxurious. And every other day you get a shower. Whoopee! Back on the old Pride
really nice. Yeah.
Back on the old Pride of Baltimore, it was just water barrels sitting on deck.
Oof. Yeah.
And we never came short of water, but your shower was a bucket from overside,
Yeah.
and maybe a small cup of water and a sponge if you wanted to go with fresh water. So then it's all about what do you carry, where do you stow it, how much you carry, how do you treat it. There's lots of tricks about perishables that don't require refrigeration, can be aided. So cycle. So for instance, you're stowing on deck, you need to make sure it's not going to get salt water on it.
Yeah.
Then keeping it out of the sun means dropping it down below. So there's green stuff goes on deck. As it ripens, you bring it down below. The really ripe stuff, short life stuff, starts down below anyway. You're going to use it up. At some point, you can run through this cooling box to preserve things. Things like eggs, as long as they're dry, they don't need refrigeration. Now, I heard stories about you don't want to use already previously refrigerated eggs. We found no history. The trip I made down to the Falkland Islands and back on a boat with no refrigeration, we had no choice in a couple occasions of buying eggs that had been refrigerated, and we didn't have a problem. It's about making sure the yolk doesn't drift to this shell. So that's where the rotation business comes in. So
you rotate your eggs.
You rotate and keep them dry. And we've had 30
does
days.
one person get that job, or do you all take turns rotating the eggs?
You know, funny you should ask, because I never got tasked with that job.
No, really.
I don't know why. Now that you bring it up.
Yeah.
And then there's other things such as mayonnaise. Commercial mayonnaise, store-bought mayonnaise has so much acidic in it, it's not going to go bad unrefrigerated easily. It can, it just with discipline. So, you know, you'd buy yourself a gallon tin in a boat like this size, and you decant. You don't have to refrigerate that gallon thing as long as it's sealed. And there is this story that we were careful to abide by. Don't use a silver utensil when you're doing that. For some reason, that can really cause mischief. So non-silver utensil, decant, which means plastic maybe.
Yeah. Decant,
use that. You can or don't, if you have the room, go ahead and cool that, but you don't have to. But that's what you can do with commercial mayonnaise, ketchup, mustard, relishes, your salad dressings. None of that needs refrigeration.
Yeah, anything with that vinegar base, right?
Yeah. So there's some. So if you're not used to that, and there are a lot of folks that live ashore that way without refrigeration, so they would know all of these things as well. But I think when we go adventuring, sailing, there's an adjustment, and it's not hard to do. You just got to think about it.
Yeah. So Pride has some refrigeration, has a freezer, has a refrigerator, has a pantry fridge or a produce fridge. But for those longer voyages, that doesn't really hold all of the stuff a cook could want. How has it been kind of training new cooks into, you know, the mindset of voyaging and prepping for that?
Well, two things that I'm thinking of right now is when it comes to produce, onions, potatoes, cabbages, those are your longest. Those kinds of things are your longest lived, and so plan on using those things and having them on board. The freezer is not small, so if you're very careful about what you buy, you can have protein for quite a long time. Then there's the packaging between cans and other forms of packaging. You've got plenty of space to keep the vessel well victualed. Now, it's generally speaking about a week, and you run out of the really delicate leafy stuff. It just won't last that long.
Yeah.
Even with some refrigeration, it just won't last that long. So you plan on a menu that is going to recognize that if you're looking for non-cooked ingredients in the sense of the greens and the vegetables, what have you, make a plan. So you have to get them to answer your question about the cook is make sure they're studying, if they don't already know, what that that descending tree of what's delicate and what's more robust in its natural form, so that you use it in that order. And you can have a couple of weeks of pretty decent meals with that thing that's most commonly experienced ashore, which is the protein, the starch, and the veg kind of thing, salad and what have you. So these days, and for a long time now, having a salad's been pretty important. Cabbage goes well with that. If you handle it well, you can do very well with that. The cooks getting to understand that they don't have resupply once a week, that can be a bit of a giant thing. For instance, we can't use the big cans, even with 18 on board, and quite often we're just the 12 in the crew. We wind up with everything is just not used up, so we have to use smaller cans. So in terms of buying, working with major houses is difficult because they want to do case lot, they want to do big cans, and so
we kind of fall in that awkward middle ground.
Right,
so it ends up being 6 or 7 shopping carts at the grocery store rather than getting it delivered by pallet.
Yeah.
We've got a question in with a water maker. Does Pride use any freeze-dried food, perhaps just for tough conditions where cooking is difficult?
The difficult part. No, we haven't made a big plan for the difficult part. And I'm not.
It just becomes difficult.
Well, okay. So most of the time, the vessel's just going from A to B.
Yeah.
And it's a fair weather program in the sense that we're not doing it in the wintertime. We're not a commerce vessel in the strictest sense. And every operator is looking for the fairest experience out on the water. We will not beat to windward in a strong thing. Now, we have occasions of racing where we're pushing pretty hard, and so that's when it gets the roughest. But those situations are pretty short-lived. 12 hours, 18 hours. Now, we had a long one. You were on board for that one. I wasn't, for between Charleston and Bermuda. And so was cooking really pretty hard, or was it just the physical nature of the motion?
Cooking was a little bit difficult. It helped that we were on one tack the whole way, so we could kind of shim up pots and pans.
Yeah.
Phil, our cook, ended up kind of tying himself, putting some ropes around in the galley to stop himself from sliding over, because we were 15 degrees plus angle of heel for 3 days and 4 hours.
Yeah.
It's the whole way.
So I haven't had that kind of sustained pressure that you just described, but what you do describe is that constant angle, that same angle. You're not doing a lot of that. You can compensate for that. So in terms of having hardware or certain foods that you are set aside to answer the question, no, we haven't had that. Now, part of the reason is we're a pretty big boat. I mean, as small as we are on one hand, we're a pretty big boat. She's 91 on the water, 26 of beam. She's a sizable boat, and so and like I say, we're fair weather sailing. We don't go hunting for the storms. The only time we really deal with them is if we're thinking of being competitive, and we're not afraid of saying the hell with this.
Once it becomes not very fun anymore.
Yeah.
So kind of keeping on with this in theme of endurance on how far the boat can go, how much fuel does Pride 2 carry, and how much of a limiting factor is that?
We have 4 tanks. One is dedicated to the generator. That's 55 gallons, and we try to keep that sort of, in my mind's eye, that's dedicated. Then we have transportation fuel in other 3 tanks, which is roughly 900 gallons. Or is it 850? So 310 here, 400, and then that's 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 158, almost 900, a little less than 900. Now, when we're running twin screw, just plain motoring, no much wind at all, we're burning basically 0.8 gallons per mile. So less than a gallon a mile. So we can go 1,000, maybe more, on that load of fuel. But of course, we're a sailboat, and conditions never stay that way.
Right.
So we have been able to stretch our fuel when we're not racing and therefore dedicated to only sailing. We've been able to stretch our fuel out to 1,500 miles. That's because in motor sailing, so say it's 6 knots of wind and it's on the beam, you're not really making more than, say, 3 or 4 knots of boat speed, and it's a bit rolly, not working very well. One engine, you're down to 0.4 gallons per mile. And so that you can really stretch the fuel that way. And meanwhile, because of our technology, we produce 300 amps on our on our 24 volt system, so we can keep things powered up. We can invert through the main house bank and run the water maker. So we don't have a particular load that if we're drawing from the main house bank but supporting it with an engine, we can run anything we have on board the boat. So that way we've got our endurance is somewhat increased.
Yeah.
So crossing an ocean, we were on a way. The most dramatic concern for having fuel and keeping on time was between Hawaii and Shanghai for the 1st of April arrival in Shanghai in '98. We came out of Hawaii. It was an El Nino year. It was very slow trades, and we wound up using quite a bit of fuel on our way across. I wound up organizing a diversion to Guam. As it turned out, the wind came up, and we could have crossed the Pacific, but then once we got into the East China Sea, we wouldn't have had the fuel reserves to maintain getting on there on time. We could have gotten there, but on time. So the diversion was important, even though we got the breeze and could have crossed, for having the reserves for dealing with the rest of the motoring that we wound up doing inside the China Sea.
Yeah. Speaking of getting there on time, is there a metric of average boat speed that we need to maintain to get somewhere?
It's from a calendar point of view, we have a metric. We have 2 of them. One's a sort of hemmed-in model whereby it's coastal or inshore, and that's 110 nautical miles for 24 hours, and the other one's 130. So if we have a leg that's straight across the ocean, we'll use the 130, and then for anything leg that's more hemmed in, like along the coast of that's 110. So we can plan out and put it on the calendar, and that we can do years and years in advance. The planning for Asia actually started 3 years before it happened, not because it had to wait 3 years. From the planning point of view, it was pretty straightforward. Where you have these metrics, we apply the metrics, bada boom, bada bang, these are the dates.
And why is that metric so successful?
It's using, the philosophy is to sail the boat.
Yeah.
So transitioning from the first pride to the second pride, I was used to a metric on the old boat as being 100 miles a day.
Yeah.
We hadn't broken it down into ocean crossing and coastal. It was only coastal. And I inherited that metric. I think Armin set it up as we calculate based on 100 miles a day. So the second boat comes along, and I'm thinking, well, shoot, it's a bigger boat, longer. She can go faster. Check, check, check. Let's go to 130 miles a day. Well, after the first year, I started being sensitive myself, but also hearing, and it got all the way up to the board of directors, in fact, that we were spending a lot of time motoring. So upon analysis, I realized that yes, the boat's faster because it's longer, but the wind's not faster.
That's the same weather. Yeah.
So duh. So we dropped it back.
Sure.
And so we dropped back from 130 to 110 for the coastal side. And I think I was using, we didn't do any ocean crossings in that first year or so, but I think I was messing with 140 or 150 a day when we were doing more open water stuff, like down to the Caribbean, across to Bermuda, and I was realizing it just wasn't it was too fast. It was, for the business of not having to go 60% of the time under power.
Yeah.
We wanted to keep it down to, say, 20 to 30 to 40%, depending. So so that's where we create this business of, okay, then it's up to the captain to say, okay, rush, 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 sail, 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 motor, motor, motor. These are these constantly like a slinky. It's know your weather and understand the boat's capabilities. And we've been very successful, I think, in the long run of being able to sail way, way, way above our majority of the time. And so it's I've held up for the short stuff when we get most vulnerable to having the motor. I've held up in New York a whole day. New York to Baltimore. What is that? 300 miles?
Yeah, it's pretty short, John.
So that's 3 in a day, say, based on arrival time, departure time stuff. I've held up a whole day. I said, we're not even going out there because it's going to be contrary. It's going to be uncomfortable. Why do that? Well, wait, let that blow by, get underway the next day, go sailing. We have a lovely sail down to the Delaware, and then we're going to probably be motoring anyway. So that business is where the driver of the vessel really is challenged. And I've had partner captains get pretty concerned about their sense of confidence about doing as much sailing as they want to do. And different personalities, we tend to go to the motor side a little more quickly than another.
Oh, sure, yeah.
To hedge their bets, to make sure they're on time. And that's something that's just a nature thing. It's until you learn the boat, until you have your confidence about interpreting the weather.
And there's also the technological advances now have really helped answer that question.
Yeah.
The computer does a lot of the work for you.
Yeah.
This question is coming in from Brandy Port, former crew member. I know the water maker on Pride 2 is there, so there's no need to carry additional water. But on the first boat, was there a need to carry additional drums of water on deck? And how much would you carry for longer passages?
Wow, that's been a while since I was aboard her doing that. But yes, we would carry some extra water. It's surprising when you're only dipping out of barrels and it's just a regular soup ladle, how little water you actually use, and you're feeling fine.
Sure.
You're not feeling like you're going to run out of water. You're not putting anybody on rations. So the longest legs that we prepared for beyond the normal legs of the old Pride of Baltimore was, say, between San Diego in '83, coming back from the Pacific, San Diego to Acapulco, Acapulco to Panama. We probably put a couple extra water barrels on board. We certainly put extra fuel barrels on board, because I saw in the lee of that, even though we were going more or less favorable direction, in the lee there are lots of times when the wind is all over the place against you, not necessarily hard or not at all. So we wound up carrying extra fuel. We've not had to do that for a long time with Pride of Baltimore 2. One time I think Bob Glover had to carry extra fuel barrels. I think he carried 2 on the West Coast once, coming back. But we also were learning a lot about what the boat could do. And routing is also another thing. I've never routed the boat northbound on the west side from Panama close to shore. It's always, you got to go way out. That's why we've included Hawaii that first time in '94. We're not going to go up the coast. It's just a beat and thrash, and those folks on the West Coast know this better than anybody. So you got to go out 1,000 miles. You got to get out to the longitude of Acapulco, and then you need to go further and stay off the coast about 1,000 miles before you start trying to work your way north. So now, to answer your question, Brandy, I can't recall specifically, but it wouldn't have been a lot of water, because when you're just ladling and the cook is just cooking, it's just, you don't use that much water.
Yeah.
But when you have the water maker here aboard the boat, we're going through 100 gallons a day.
Yeah.
Which
is a lot.
And our tankage is only 300, which is why you got to cycle it every time you run the generator. Do not, or every time you're motoring in the evening time. Don't say, well, we're half full in one of the tanks. No, you're not.
Yeah.
Fill it up, fuse it up while you got it, because otherwise, if it fails, now you do have to ration.
Yeah.
And then you got to be stuck with, do you divert if you have a complete failure? And I got to say, RO technology is really very dependable stuff if you take care of it. I mean, 30 years ago it was new to me, and I was a little, you worried, you were superstitious. But if you're disciplined and you care for it, it works. It's very dependable.
Oh, and it creates a huge level of comfort. You can take showers, you can consume water, you can wash dishes in fresh water.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of comfort there. When it comes to the business of charging your phones, can we do that on board? Why can we do that on board?
So I mentioned inversion.
Yeah.
So the vessel has 3 voltages on board. 2 of them are in the direct current mode, which is 12 and 24. So we've had car charger sockets, car sockets on board. That's been moving over to USB sockets. We have 110, and so we invert for that. And so we've not had a problem getting things charged. What we've had a problem is how many outlets we have. So back in the late 80s, it's like, who carries 110 volt gear? They got to charge.
Right, yeah.
We didn't have, the crew members didn't have a phone. Very few computers were going. So by the time we get into the 21st century, we're all running around here. We just don't have very many outlets.
Yeah.
So that is something that's been getting attacked. So I think you last year organized spreading USB charging sockets around for each bunk.
Yeah.
And that reduces that congestion. And then and we've been converting what outlets we do have to combination USB and AC outlets. So we're not seeing the congestion, we're not seeing the piling up, and yes, we can get it done. And yes, we talk about leaving it plugged in. Don't do that. I think we all break that rule one way or another, but we do talk about that.
Yeah.
It needs to be talked about. That's a sleeping bomb, hand grenade.
The lithium-ion batteries is got some potential hazard there.
Right.
A small percentage, but the potential is still there. Cool. One kind of final question here before we wrap up. When it comes to training the crew for offshore sailing versus near coastal sailing or Chesapeake Bay sailing, what's the difference?
Well, first of all, we don't hire from anywhere outside of the traditional sailing community of enthusiasts and professionals. And the reason is that the nomenclature, the style of life, the pay scale, someone coming from outside of that community for the first time to Pride, it is a world of difference. There's just no measuring a yacht club experienced person racing all the time, going offshore racing, and then coming here. It's just night and day from a cultural and nomenclature and style point of view. So we're always hiring for those who have had traditional vessel experience for at least a season. It'd be better if it were more than a season, to have them in a position of understanding what they're likely to see once they come aboard. Now, when they've had that and they come aboard, it's still a crazy shock to the system. I mean, the boat has a reputation, but that reputation is built on a whole lot of work and a whole lot of concentration and a whole lot of doing it again and again and again and again. And this vessel is so different than many others, is that what we find, though, is they come knowing the work. They come knowing the nomenclature. They come knowing the mutual respect and the teamwork and the mission. All of those other vessels require as much public engagement as we do. The fact that we don't have a program is beside the point. We're engaged with the public, they're engaged with the public. So our crew are ambassadors. So we need to have that sort of, I know what the experience is likely to be like. What they don't know is how intense it will be. And then the specifics of the vessel. We train that very quickly. The boat does all the teaching. It's like, hit you smack in the face. Oh, that's how that is. Okay. Yeah. So we just go sailing. And, of course, that's what they're all looking for anyway. It's a development, professional development in movement as you're moving through your time as a professional, and you're looking for licensing, and even after licensing, if you change your boats, they're the ones that are going to, and their missions, but mostly the boats, they're going to be the major educators. Now, that doesn't mean you don't learn from others, your shipmates, through your leaders and masters. It's just that the most proportional impact is coming from you're doing it, and you're doing it again, and you're doing it again, and you face yourself in your own little mirror and say, I really screwed up. You don't have to talk about it, but you know. And then afterwards, you know how to do it differently, and the boat does the teaching. So we're looking for that familiarity with what's the community, what is our challenges, what is the common courtesy, because it's communal living, and it's not commute for a day and go for one night and then go commute home every day like some of the inshore boats. It's the business of accepting the fact that there are differences among people and talking.
And they're sleeping 3 feet away from you.
Yeah. And you can't. Yeah, you're working with them.
Yep.
And then you get to sleep with them. Oh boy.
Yeah, it's all great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this episode of Coffee with Captain, and thank you guys for donating. That really helps keep this moving along. Captain Miles, do you have any parting words?
So we're getting done in the next few days with this crew and this layup, and so Jeff and I are going to take some time away from each other as well as from the job.
Yeah.
So Coffee With's coming back live in a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and actually haven't spoken to the tech people about whether or not there'll be reruns. I don't know how
there will be reruns.
Oh, okay,
so keep your eye out for those. Those will be next Friday and the Friday after that.
Right.
So there will be segments of Coffee with Captain, kind of best of.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. And other than that, this global pandemic is still a global pandemic, so remain diligent, folks. Stay diligent.